Hello, my name is Phil Owen, and I'm with Communities for Recovery, and I run the Targeted Response Team. We are doing some interviews in lieu of the Austin Area Opioid Work Group. We have adapted to our current climate and are doing a podcast format, and I have my first guest today, which is Robin Peyson. I'm delighted to have Robin here. Hello, Robin. Can you give everybody a little bit of background of yourself and what you are currently involved in?
Sure. Hi, Phil. Thanks for inviting me to be on this show. I don't even know what to call it on being interviewed. I was the executive director of Communities for Recovery for 5 years, and I left a little over a year ago. I loved the work, and am still very, very attached to Communities for Recovery and you know, the folks that work there and the work that you do. So now I am the executive director of the Recovery Coalition of Texas. It's a statewide organization, and our mission, I'm gonna look at my notes, because we chose the words very carefully. If anyone's ever designed a mission statement, you know, it's crafted carefully, you know, on purpose. So the mission of the Recovery Coalition of Texas is to advocate for the recovery movement and support individuals and organizations engaged in peer-based recovery supports and services. And the reason why we've languaged it like that, engaged in peer-based recovery supports and services, is while we see ourselves as primarily serving recovery community organizations, we're also supporting any organizations who have PRSS programs, as well as people getting PRSS services. So that's what we mean by engaged in. You can be either providing services or getting services, because we want this where we want their coalition to be a voice for anybody in the state who's passionate about recovery and passionate about the recovery movement and a part of the recovery community. And so our vision is the Recovery Coalition envisions a future where recovery is fully supported, valued, celebrated, and available to all who seek it. So that's what we're doing now. We're a relatively new organization. We were founded by Ben Bass, Philander Moore, and myself last year. Philander has had to step off the board as a result of his new position working for the Texas Health and Human Services. The attorneys there determined it was a conflict of interest because, of course, there's the possibility of future funding from the state. No funding at this point in time from the state. And so we are relatively new. We have a Facebook page, and we're in the process of getting our website page up.
That's awesome. Know that Philander greatly needed at the state. I know we loved it when he was, so I'm happy to see him back there, and I'm sure many others are as well. And Ben Bass is another man of mystery that I've got to have on the show. I'm going to have to hit him up and see if he'll do an interview with me, because he does incredible things out in El Paso. Mm-hmm. Could you? I
feel like I'm walking with giants. You know, Philander's made such a huge difference for recovery in our state, and I'm happy for the state that he's going to be able to use those skills and understanding of recovery on behalf of the statewide opioid response.
Well, don't minimize your efforts, because we all view you as a giant as well. Your efforts.
Well, that always feels a little uncomfortable, but thank you.
I can understand that, but you truly have done great things. Can you let everybody?
Well, my family keeps saying, I thought you were retiring. And I said, well, you know, if you love what you do, it's not work.
That's right.
And so
it was a great 6 months.
Yeah, that's right. It was a great 6 months.
Do you mind telling everybody what a PRSS is? I know you mentioned that.
Sure.
Talking about the
peer recovery supports and services. Sometimes it's called peer-based recovery supports and services, like Dr. Kelly's work out of Harvard. He calls it PBRSS, but pretty much we use PRSS. That's sort of a term that's widely used, people understand.
Okay. How might that look different for somebody that's used to or familiar with the services, say at like a treatment facility or what may be known as rehab? What might peer services look differently than those sort of services? Or are they?
Well, they're complementary to those services. They're complementary to treatment or rehab. But as we all know, treatment is finite. If you're a 30-day program or 28-day program, or luckily, if you're lucky, there's some 90-day programs out there, like at the Recovery Alliance. And rehab, again, it's finite in time. So then the question becomes, well, what do you do when you're done with treatment and you go back into your community? How do you support that? And so one thing that PRSS does is that it provides some continuity to help people become part of a community which of recovery that supports your recovery. But it's not something that just happens after treatment. I don't want to give that. It's really a sort of a continuum that wraps around family and friends, and can happen as you're trying to decide about going in and asking for care. There are some people who skip treatment completely and just get connected to an RCO or recovery community. But what's fundamentally different is when you're an individual seeking recovery, you sit down with a peer recovery coach and you develop your recovery plan. That coach is there because of their lived personal experience. And together with that support of that coach, you craft your own plan about what your recovery looks like based on what's worked for you, and with the support and sort of exploration of what do you want in your life, and how can you get there from here. And so you're really in charge of your recovery. You're empowered by your coach, who's there to support you defining what that path looks like.
Great. Thank you. I had the great fortune of, I hold a PRSS certification. I had the great fortune of learning the skills that I use today under your direction. And I'll tell you that some of the peers I worked with when I first started still contact me. So when you talk about that it's not so finite as other services, I completely get what you're saying. And being in for the long haul, if you will, has been really kind of the way it has defined the role with regards to long-term engagement. I will say,
and we had to learn that. We've learned that over the years that I was at Communities for Recovery, how critical that is. Inherited some grants that were like, well, it's 3 months. Well, no, it's 6 months. Struggle with contracts that want to, at Communities for Recovery, that said, well, we'll pay for 6 months of services. Well, no, it's kind of, how long do you need us? Right. And how do we support you? And what's your journey going to look like? Because when you're, first and newly in recovery, we may talk to you we may see you a couple of times a week. We may support you by phone and text 5 times a week. What is it you need? And then 5 years into recovery, what you need and want to support your recovery is going to look very different. And we'll work that out with you, because you get to say, then you have a reoccurrence of use and you're like, oh no, well, now what? Now that's going to look different. How do we support you so you get back on track as fast as you can? If this is an illness, if addiction is an illness characterized by frequent reoccurrence of use, we have to stop the shaming and blaming when people do that. We don't do that if you have diabetes and your blood sugar fluctuates. We don't say, oh, you just, you don't want to get well, or all those conversations. That we're here for the long term.
Yes, and now that we've kind of described what it's like to work as a coach and what those services, that service delivery might look like, can you give me an idea of what you're seeing around or hearing around the nation with people adapting to this new landscape of COVID-19 and what some of that service
Yeah.
looks like?
Well, in some ways, and this will segue into something important that I want to say, but I've been thinking a lot about it and looking at how fast mutual aid groups like AA and NA and other 12-step groups have been able to develop an infrastructure to support distance recovery. And what we had was an infrastructure already there to build on. There were already online support groups and mutual aid groups and 12-step groups for people who couldn't get to meetings or were in rural communities or had other responsibilities that didn't allow them to, get out and to go to meetings. And so we've been able to very, very quickly as a recovery movement, as a national recovery community, step up and expand on those. So like if you're looking for those information, ARCO, the Association of Recovery Community Organizations, has a great webpage that lists all the different mutual aid groups, from smart recovery to Christian recovery to LGBTQ recovery, all the different groups where that people feel supported by. And so
that webpage address, Robin?
I don't, but if you just go to ARCO Austin, and I can send it to you, and maybe you can
okay, sure,
post that out.
Okay.
If you go to Austin the Association of Recovery Community Organizations, and then under resources, I think they have a tab that's online resources.
Great.
And Unity Recovery, Robert Ashford is doing some wonderful work out of Pennsylvania. And so they're sprouting up more and more in communities for recovery. You have things on your website now. You've got some yoga groups, and you're doing this, and there are other resources on communities for recovery. But the thing that I wanted to say that I think is really important for us to remember now, and I've been making some notes about it, is I think that I was thinking about how the recovery community brings certain characteristics that are really important as our society struggles with some of the issues we're struggling with. Widespread addiction, whether it's addiction to drugs or screen addiction or, the sort of, anyway, some of the complicated issues which now have been overtaken tremendously as we face this pandemic. But I wanted to point out that we're made up of individuals, family members, friends, and allies, many of whom have worked a very active program of recovery. And we've learned a great deal along the way. So I wanted to talk about what we've learned. We learned how to manage and face our fears, separating what is actually happening from what we've made up. We've learned how to be ruthlessly honest with ourselves, how to be responsible for our choices and behavior, how to make amends, and return ourselves to a place of integrity when we make a mistake. We've learned how to respond instead of react. We've learned what it means to be accountable. We practice self-care. We know that strength comes from being of service to others. We know how to ask for help. We know that our strength does not lie in isolating, but in connecting. Many of us have learned that the opposite of fear is faith, and many of us have grown spiritually, however we define that. And these are lessons learned through life experience, and they're often hard-won. But as a result, our communities are resilient and engaged, and they're strong because of our commitment to each other, to ourselves, and to recovery. So I want to remind people, as we face this pandemic, we face uncertainty, fear, loss, and grief. This is a challenge unlike humanity has faced. In some respects, its scope is even beyond the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. But I want to remind the recovery community that we're better prepared than most, because we do know how to support one another. We do know how to reach out. We do know how to ask for help and help others. We do know that we'll make mistakes, that we will fail, and then we will stand up, dust ourselves off, and try again. We know how to practice patience and compassion. We know how to forgive. We know how to choose love over hate, and these qualities will be needed now more than ever. So in the coming days, we can be of service not to just those in our recovery community, but to people in the broader community, because we are going to have to hold hands to get through this. But we know how we can do this.
I love that, Robin. You know, I'm a firm believer that necessity is the mother of invention, and people in recovery have had to reinvent ourselves. That message is strong.
From ashes.
From ashes.
From nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I just have a couple other things I wanted to ask before we part ways with our audience. And one of those is, if you were able to create your own flavor of ice cream, what would it be?
I was thinking maybe pistachio and coconut.
Wow.
Doesn't that sound good?
That would be so good.
And maybe a little dark chocolate.
Very nice. Well, the one other thing I wanted to ask was if you had any advice. You just gave us such a positive message. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience before we end the interview?
Remember that that we're resilient. We're an amazing group of resilient, creative people with grit. You know, and we know to just remember to reach out to each other. When someone gets, remember that anxiety turns into irritability. And so we're going to run into a lot of irritable people. And just take a deep breath. Remember, they're just afraid. When you're irritable, ask yourself, what do I need to do to practice self-care? Take a couple of deep breaths, take a walk in my yard or walk around the apartment, and just practice patience with each other and with ourselves as we go through the next couple of months.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. Would you like to plug your organization one more time, please?
Yes, thank you. Recovery Coalition of Texas. Go and like our Facebook page. Stay tuned for our website. I'm working on the content as we speak. We're going to have on the website opportunity for people to join. We're going to have individual memberships, and very reasonable for annual membership. We're going to have membership on a sliding scale basis for organizations, so we can start being self-supporting. And what we want to do is have a united voice for people in recovery to advocate for policy changes that support the recovery community in our state.
Great. Well, as we get closer to all that getting up, I'd like to get you and Ben back on the show at some point so that we can boost this all again, because I so much appreciate what you do, and you really made my day doing this interview.
Thank you. It was lots of fun, and it's always wonderful to see you, Phil. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right.